So join me, please, in welcoming Natasha on stage.
Okay, never mind. Can play. Yeah, that's fine. Let's see. Okay, it's working. Huh. Oh, I clicked. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. So last talk before lunch, so I'll try to make it quick. A little bit about myself. This is a web conference, and I guess I'm more known in the iOS community. So my name is Natasha. I'm known as Natasha the Robot. Maybe at some point you've read my blog. I did blog about Ruby on Rails when I first started coding. I switched then to iOS, and I've been started with Objective-C, and then Swift came out, and I started learning Swift. And since then, things kind of exploded. I blog a lot about Swift and iOS development. I run a really big Swift newsletter that has 18,000 subscribers. I run a Swift job board, and probably most rewarding for me is running the Try Swift conference. So I know how much work it takes to organize an event like this. I kind of got this crazy idea of organizing a Swift conference, but in Japan. For some reason, it sounded exciting to me. And this is the second year we've done it, and it has grown from 500 attendees last year to over 700. So pretty sure it's the biggest Swift conference in the world. I also have expanded to New York, where we have over 300 attendees, and it's going to be in September. And now, as a new challenge, they mentioned I spend a little bit of time in India, so I've decided to also run a conference in India. Oh, it looks like okay, sorry, just realized that. Is there like a system preferences?
Maybe the other way.
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, you can display.
Just put it on the mirror. Yeah.
No, display, there you go, arrangements. Really? There you go. Okay. Technical difficulties. Okay, there you go. Sorry about that. That's the hardest part, is just getting the tech right. So I mentioned I do a lot in the Swift community, but today, WWDC, the Apple's developer conference, is around the corner. It's only, I think it's June 5th or June 6th, so it's only a few weeks away. So today I'm going to get higher up overview of the iOS ecosystem and maybe what you can expect. And maybe for those of you who are not as familiar with iOS, you can kind of get an idea of where iOS is heading and how you can think about that. So today, as everyone knows, Apple has their own app ecosystem for iOS devices, for iPhone devices, and there are over 2 million apps on the App Store, which is really awesome. There are a lot of people developing apps. But the bad news is that consumers are downloading like no apps. You know, if you think even about your own usage, maybe you have a few apps, you use them very often, or maybe not so often, and then you know, it's hard to get people to download more apps. And even when users do download more apps, the drop-off is really, really high. An average app loses 95% of users within the first month. So there's that issue of getting users to download your app and retention. So these are the things that iOS developers and product managers are struggling with. How do you get more users? If you look at the top apps on the App Store, they're all owned by Facebook. Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. Maybe like Snapchat was almost owned by Facebook. So the ecosystem is very competitive, and it's getting isolated to the top, where few companies are owning it, basically. So this is like really scary, especially if you are an iOS developer. You know, where this app's going, most apps fail. They can't, you know, you don't have any user retentions. How do you get customers? But you know, I'm not a pessimist. So today's talk is how you can think differently about the app ecosystem, and maybe even how Apple is thinking about it. I'm not an Apple representative, but hopefully you can see, based on previous things that Apple is rolling out, you can kind of see where the ecosystem is going. And the answer is, it's kind of becoming more like the web, more decentralized a bit. And the way to think about it is thinking of your app as a set of features, as kind of the central point for a bunch of decentralized features. So today, during the talk, maybe your company already does have an iOS app, and you're maybe helping with creating an API for it. So today, I want you to think about how your company can, how a customer can use your app without ever opening it. And that's the main key. The consumer, I think, in the olden days, or even now, you know, the interaction on the iPhone is that the person gets the iPhone, they open up your app, and then that's great, they're using your app. But that's not how it's going to work, right? Most users are forgetting that your app is installed. So the key is to get them to use your app without them ever having to remember that it was installed, and maybe not even installing it. So how do we do that? The first thing, maybe the most obvious one, is notifications. I think notifications have been around for a while, for a long time. But since the Apple Watch came out, it really made a big difference. Notifications became, you know, the central point of iOS, basically. Your Apple Watch is basically a notification device. And it's really magical. I can walk around a new city here in Greece, and I can look around at the architecture. I can enjoy myself, because I know that when that important email comes in or that important text message comes in, it's going to notify me on my wrist. I don't have to be like OCD and like checking my phone all the time and making sure that that message is there. So this is a really big deal. And I think Apple has seen that because they expanded a lot of the functionality to the iPhone. They introduced last year notification extensions, or like rich notification. So now you can have a whole text messaging conversation without ever opening the iMessage app, just through notifications. So thinking again about how can the user use your app without ever opening it, well, you can have really rich notification extensions that allow the user to do that. Foursquare has taken a really good advantage of this. I use Foursquare all the time, but you know, sometimes I might forget to use it, or I'm looking to go to dinner, or I arrived to a new city, such as Verona, and I want to know what should I do here. I might not think right away. Maybe I'll go to TripAdvisor, right? I might Google things to do. You don't think like Foursquare. But Foursquare gets ahead of me even thinking about what to do. It knew I arrived to the new city, and it showed me a rich notification that showed me the top places to go to check out. And actually did that. I went to the gardens, the first thing it suggested, and it was an amazing experience. And I never had to remember to open the Foursquare app. So this is how your app could be useful without ever opening it. So this is really, really important to think about. Another app example is Dark Sky. It only sends you a notification if it's going to rain one day, so you remember to put an umbrella. So this is some of the creative ways that your app could be in front of the user and usable without them ever having to remember that, you know, they installed it. This is the 95% retention rate drop-off. By using these features and being actually useful to the user, they're going to keep remembering your brand and using it. The next thing is speech recognition. So this is super new. Apple has introduced the AirPods, and I'll be the first to be super annoyed at the removal of the head jack. That was really mean. But you know, they're marketed as like this annoying, there's no headphone jack, so now you have to have this stupid cable. You have to buy them. These are pretty expensive. But the big value add of these headphones is battery life. So normal Bluetooth headphones don't last that long. But these AirPods are actually more sleek, and they stay in your ear maybe a little bit better. They look better. I don't know. That's up to debate. But the key is that we have to think of AirPods beyond just the headphones part, because that's how they're marketed right now, and that's good. But long-term strategy is these are in your computer. So think of Google Glass, but made by Apple. When Google Glass came out, it was just in your face. It's ugly. Nobody wants to wear it except like some really crazy geeks who are willing to put that thing on their face. But with AirPods, they remove the headphone jack, so most consumers have no choice. It's really annoying to have that. But these are in your ear. They connect to Siri, and this is just the start. So this is just the start of speech recognition. The technology is not quite there yet, so these are marketed as headphones. But there's this great article from a chief scientist at Baidu, and it says that as speech accuracy goes from 95% to 99% accuracy, it's going to be a game changer. If any of you have seen that movie, Her, you can see that future with speech recognition in your ear. I mean, you're basically as close to embedding a chip in your brain. You're putting these headphones in your ear. They comfortably happen to stay in all day. They can read. They can talk to you. So this is just the start. And as speech recognition improves, we are all going to be speaking to Siri. So this is where it's kind of starting, right? And Apple has introduced an API for Siri. It's very limited. Right now, there's only a few things you can do. You can do audio or video calling, messaging, payments, searching photos, workouts, and ride booking. So very limited. But if your app is in one of these categories, now your user can use the app without ever opening it, right? So this is free marketing. If this is one of your apps, implement this, and now you have another entryway into your app. Your user will just say, hey, book me a ride, and your app will be one of the choices they have. So this is, again, very great for your users to use your app, because there are different competing apps for the same thing, so you have to stand out. And people complain that, hey, why didn't Apple have an API for everything for everyone? My app can't use this. But this is a very Apple way of doing it, because by opening up the API very slowly, they're getting consumers to trust the system, right? Because if every time I want to send a payment, Siri works, then I'm going to trust Siri to do that for me. But if they opened it up for everyone, for everything, and it works only 95% of the time or less, because maybe I have an accent and Siri doesn't understand me most of the time, then I'm not going to have faith in this technology. I'm not going to trust my AirPods. I'm not going to talk to them. So this is just the beginning. With WWDC, we expect Apple, of course, to open up this platform and add more intents that all apps want to use. And if your app is one of those, definitely you can implement this already, and you can look out at WWDC if you can use this, because again, this creates a new starting point for your app that you didn't have before, which are AirPods, which you can consider a new platform of Apple, right? Right now, again, it is just headphones, but you can imagine the next version will be more like a computer that you can talk to. So this is just the beginning. So again, can you use your app without ever opening it? Yes, you can. With Siri, You can pick out the feature that you need Siri for, implement it, and now the user has that feature that goes into your app, and your app becomes more usable. Next one is extensions. Unfortunately, everything is named extensions. But Apple has also provided an ecosystem where you can now embed your part of the app into an existing app. So Apple Maps is an app that's installed on every single iPhone, and people actually can't delete it. So, and similar to iMessage, right? So these are apps that are there on the phone. They're getting millions of users. Maybe your app is not getting that. But once the user has your app installed, you can integrate with these apps and become on the forefront as the user uses the embedded Apple apps. So again, this is open table. When you search for a restaurant, it's going to say, hey, book a table. It's already an extension in there. So now you can use the open table app without ever remembering about this app. It's just going to seamlessly be in there as I'm already using another app. Next is iMessage apps. These are really huge. So for example, you can build gelatos together. But the big thing about iMessage apps is that the second user doesn't have to even have the iMessage app installed, right? If I download the gelato app and I send you the first layer of gelato, if you don't have this app, you can still play and build the gelato. So again, this is now getting into this territory of acquiring users. You first had this one user, now they're sending an iMessage sticker or an iMessage game to the other user. The other user can interact and become a user without ever even downloading your app. So can your user use your app without ever downloading it, right? That's a really big step out there. That's more like web development. You can send amazing things like the full weather, a beautiful weather forecast to your friend without ever opening the app and like checking what the exact weather is. So again, this weather app is completely usable without ever opening it. I can just look in the iMessage and send it to my friend, and we can decide our plans and where we want to go based on the weather. So this is really big. And if you really don't have ideas for iMessage apps, or maybe it's not as relevant, maybe you can do something that the Yelp app did. They have super cute branding. They have these cute little animals and rocket ships. And they just made stickers. So these are cute enough stickers that people will want to use them. But, you know, they're just fun. But they do promote a lot of branding. So now, as I use these fun stickers, I'm going to be reminded of the Yelp app. So I'm using the app and thinking of the app without ever opening it. And when stickers first came out in iMessage, people laughed. Actually, at WWDC, people were just like, oh, like what the heck, stickers? This is annoying, this is stupid. And I'm not going to argue and say that the iMessage interface for iMessage apps is nice. It's horrible. It's really awful. But hopefully Apple will fix that, you think. But this is really something to consider from Andreessen Horowitz. So Line Messenger is an app that's primarily used in Japan, and it's the biggest messaging app. Actually, when we asked our Japanese friend to go on iMessage with us to coordinate some plans, he actually didn't know how to use iMessage. So this is how big Line Messenger is. Like, people don't use iMessage. They only use Line Messenger. In China, they have WeChat. So people don't use a lot of apps because they just use WeChat. So this is a really big app. And this is a really great quote. So it took Line Messenger almost 4 months to get its first 2 million users, which is pretty good. Like, I'd like to have 2 million users in 2 months. But that's just the start. But after stickers were launched, it only took 2 days to find the next million. So you can see the power that stickers have. Now the company makes $270 million from just selling stickers. So maybe the joke is on those who laughed, right? Maybe your app might be failing, but maybe you have cute enough stickers that you can sell, and maybe that could be your business. So this is not something, it is a feature, right? Adding stickers to your app is currently a little feature, or maybe adding a little iMessage app. It's like a fun feature that your product managers might ignore. But this could become your core business. This could be the core way that users interact with your app. So again, right now, the iMessage interface is not there yet. It's not as smooth as Line. But you can definitely imagine that given the success of stickers in Japan, in China, this is something that humans have demand for, and it's something that Apple has to implement to compete in China and Japan. If people want to use, if they want Asian markets to use iMessage, they have to have stickers. So this is only something that Apple will be improving. And if you're on that platform, you could be making a lot of money and you can be very successful. So can the users use your app without ever opening it? Yes, if you have an iMessage app, they just go in there, they're reminded of your app, they're using it, they're sharing it with your friend, and now their friends have access to your app without even downloading it. That's really big. So what is the future? And again, I'm not an Apple representative, but we can kind of see the trends. And one big one is from Android. Last year, Android announced that they have instant apps. And the way instant apps work is that the person goes to the web, and maybe there's some feature, they go on some link, and they click maybe to pay for parking. Well, we all know that the web experience on mobile is pretty horrible. You know, you can try to make it better, but that's why most companies end up building native apps, because it's just awful to enter your credit card information on the web. So instead of doing that painful process, apps now have the option to become instant apps, which means that they will be open. The web link will open and download only the part of the app that is necessary to complete the UI, the transaction. So this is how they're able to do it. They're basically downloading little features. They're not downloading your entire app and like all its megabytes. They're only downloading the part of the app that is necessary to make the payment, which might be 2 or 3 screens, right? So this is something that I think iOS will have to do as well, because people are browsing the web. I think I was on some website, and to view photos of food, I had to download the entire app. You know, I didn't want to do that, but they didn't want me to experience the awful web experience on mobile of looking at photos. So you have to have that, you know, compromise. Maybe I click on looking at photos, and suddenly it only downloads the photo viewer part of the app. So we don't know what iteration of this Apple will create, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that happens maybe at this WWDC. And this is something that if you're doing web development, you should definitely watch out for, because this will be something that you're going to have to work with your mobile team on. So hopefully that helps you go from kind of the scary parts of the app market to maybe the more exciting ones, and maybe you're encouraged to learn about these features and how you can create the whole atmosphere for your app, where the user never has to open your app directly, but can use it through different channels. So now a little bit about the architecture part. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but hopefully a little bit of overview for those who are working with the mobile team or are just interested about it. And today, this is by far not the exhaustive list. You're all smart here. Your mobile developers are smart. So You can definitely think of more things you can do to support this type of architecture with lots of features. But this is just a small list. And the big things are frameworks, images, and NS user activity, which I'll talk a little bit more detail. So frameworks, I think we have this on the web. You have to isolate your model layer. I mentioned that there are some extensions. There are keyboard extensions, share extensions, notification extensions. Now you can extend into maps, maybe into contacts. So this is something that has really crept up on iOS developers. Apple every year released a few more extensions. They started with like, hey, you can do a share extension. And people were like, okay, and then you kind of forget about it. And then this year, oh, there's notification extensions and all these other extensions. And now there are so many extensions that I couldn't even take a screenshot of the entire extension dialog that comes up. So again, when you think of trends for Apple, you can see one here, that extensions, there are more and more extensions, and they're becoming more and more important in the ecosystem. In addition to that, we don't just have the iPhone anymore. We have iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, Apple TV. I mentioned AirPods. Right now, they're just headphones, but you can imagine the next iteration might have some kind of interface. So Apple is becoming more and more, they're expanding the platforms. We have to build for many extensions on iPhone, but also across different platforms. So of course, as good developers, we all know that the more you have to build on, the more duplicate code you can have. So this is where frameworks come in. Again, it's very important to isolate your model layers so you can build quickly for these extensions and to reuse code and business logic. Unfortunately, iOS is really painful to do that for. This is, if you want to go into the exact details, this is a great talk on how to do it. But unfortunately, right now, you have to sort of hack around it, and you have to know some secret properties to set, so you can do cross-platform frameworks. But it works. Hopefully, again, it will become easier and better, because it makes sense to share your code across multiple extensions and multiple platforms. And again, this is the best way if you want to prepare for the next WWDC, and if your code is spaghetti code, or if you can't easily isolate your model layer into a framework, that's a really big problem. You should almost if you don't have any big bugs or features, you should take that time to isolate that model layer away. And as being, web developers, you're probably more used to it because frameworks like Ruby on Rails, they already have that set up for you. But unfortunately, iOS development is a little bit more free, so there's a lot more opportunities for putting your model layer into the view controller and things like that. But the more you can isolate it, especially into a framework, then you can build so fast for all these little extensions. Maybe each extension will take you a few hours, maybe a day, but the difference it'll make is really, really big, because now your users will be able to have access to your app without ever using it. You're going to be doing, it's free marketing and free user acquisition, free user retention. So definitely a big architecture thing to do. Next is, of course, images. You're going to have to reuse the same images or icons or branding across different extensions, across your Apple TV, watchOS apps. Fortunately, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but Apple has allowed vectorized images recently. So the key is, the problem is a lot of iOS designers or mobile designers are used to pixel perfect. And they give you these perfect size image, but the problem is there are now different device screens. There's iPad, iPad Pro. You can now split screens on your iPad. So having just one size image is not good. It's really bad. So this is where you have to urge your designers, especially for icons that are similar across the different devices, to have vectorized images. To do that, it's really easy. You just drag it into the asset catalog. You select single scale. So it's very easy. That's it. So for iOS side, having PDF images is super easy. And then furthermore, there are different colors, right? Because the TV has a dark theme. There are rumors that iOS might have a dark theme. So maybe now you have to have a light color theme and dark color theme, but maybe your icons need to stay the same. Well, again, with template images, with those vector images, it makes it easy. You just select that it's a template image in your asset catalog. And then you can change the color of your icon at any point. So I just sent my image views tint color to purple, and now that same image is purple. So you can see how this improves how fast you can develop and design different themes across dark, light, big, small. So again, you shouldn't vectorize every single image, but especially icons and branding that you're reusing again and again, that you need to change colors and vector and change sizes. This is a no-brainer. This is so easy. The designer has to do it once, and you can scale it really fast and change colors. Finally, I'm going to talk about NS user activity, which most of you might not know, but it's a Coho class. And this is where, when I mentioned those instant apps on Android, this is basically where it would be, according to, unless Apple completely changes their architecture, which I hope they do because this is horrible. So NS user activity is, this is a callback method in the app delegate. So for those of you who don't know, when you open the iOS app, a lot of the methods in the app delegate get called. So for example, when the user first opens the app, you might want to ask for some permissions for notifications. This is where you know when you can get all this information. And unfortunately, you end up having all this opening app logic, and then the app delegate grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's very bad architecture. And the user, NS user activity is pretty much similar. So in this, so for example, when the user clicks on a certain web page, but you want the experience to continue in the app, which is already possible. Maybe they're shopping on Amazon, and they're on certain bags or laptops. Well, when they click in the mobile phone, it can go straight to your app. So this is where you can see instant apps as a natural transition. And you have to do this thing that says if the user activity is they're browsing the web, this is how I want the app to handle it. And this is where the web comes in. The hardest part of this is actually uploading the URLs that will open the app, that the app can handle, to the web server. So this is something the mobile team will have to work with the web team for. They'll upload some kind of JSON file that says this is the links we can handle that you should call to the app for. And on the app side, when you open that link, it's going to verify it, it's going to parse the link and show some kind of screen there. But it started kind of innocently, this callback methods. They're just like, if they're browsing the web, do this. But then it grew a lot. So you see this if user activity type equals user activity type browsing web. Well, that extended to many different activity types. You can now use the same app delegate method to check, to make sure your app shows up in app search. And again, this is something really important. They were browsing some kind of laptop. when they're searching laptop, it could show your app. So again, free way to show your app and remind the user of your app without them ever having to open your app or remember about it. But again, you just check in that app delegate method, you'll check, is it the type of activity where the person is searching Spotlight? There's this amazing thing you can do. If I'm in Foursquare and I look up some restaurant, when I open the Maps app, it can show me the restaurant address that I just looked up. This is really, really amazing and powerful. But when the user clicks on here, guess which method gets called? That same app delegate method where you check if it comes from the map, and then you handle it from there. You give it the address. You can have contextual reminders. So in your app, maybe again, you're shopping for laptops, and you can tell Siri, remind me about this. And this is going to be the same page that they're looking for. Well, that's going to be remembered, and when the user clicks from the Reminders app, it's going to go to your NS User Activity App Delegate callback. You can now have contact interactions. I can now have my WhatsApp app can show up in the Contact app. When the user clicks on WhatsApp, I get this handled through that same method. So you can imagine that method growing very, very big. Hopefully, you isolate that logic away into its own coordinator. You can imagine that every single activity that I just mentioned can have its own object. You know, right? If it's parsing a website, that'll have a lot of logic. You want to have its own object that will do the parsing. If you have the WhatsApp calling, you want that to be its own object. And then you also want one object that kind of coordinates, depending on the activity that's called, it can have some kind of switch statement, go handle it through this object. Because if you're just putting a giant if statement in your app delegate, that's going to be horrible architecture. Hopefully Apple improves this, but maybe not. And this is, NS user activity is like something very important to get familiar with, because you can imagine that when instant apps come to iPhone, it's going to be handled very similarly. It's probably going to go to user activity and say, what part should I download, right? Which small binary or extension should I download? Or you'll have to coordinate that in some way through there. I'm not going to go through more details into how to implement that, but you can see an example through this WWDC video on how you can add proactive suggestions to your app. So as I mentioned, NS user activity handles a lot of stuff. And when you think of that ecosystem of building features, not apps, NS user activity is basically at the center of it if you're not building one of the extensions that we already talked about. So this is definitely something you want to get familiar with and also work. A lot of it will depend on working with the web development team. So today I talked about this concept that apps are no longer the center of the universe for iPhone. They're there and they're nice and they have different features or maybe a lot of features, but the future is looking more and more like adding features that kind of go into your app, and your app acts more as a coordinator of getting the user to the right place where they need to be in the app versus being the star player of your iPhone. And to architect for it, again, there's a bigger list than this, but I can't stress frameworks and isolating model layer enough. That's going to basically set you up for moving really fast when new features come out. Images, you want to be able to reuse assets and branding across different platforms and different extensions. And again, NS user activity is something that sort of, unfortunately, is the one place in your app that has to be the main center point for coordinating all that information for those features. So this is something to get used to, or maybe Apple will fix it or make a better API for it. But right now, it's sort of something that's up to you to architect really well, because they're only going to be increasing these features, right? You're going to have to work within that framework. So that's it. I just talked to you about building features, not apps. I'm happy to take questions. But I know it's lunchtime, so I'll also hang around. If anyone needs to leave early, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Do we have any questions, maybe? Yeah. First. Beautiful talk.
Hello, Natasha. Thank you for the presentation. I think you heard about React Native. And what do you think about this tool as native iOS developer? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Can you please repeat the question?
Do you know what's React Native?
Yes.
What do you think about it as iOS developer?
So there is actually a talk that was at TriSwift Tokyo that's online, and it's about this company Artsy that was an early Swift adopter, and they decided to go with React Native. So it's definitely an option. Personally, I'm not comfortable with it because it goes through Facebook. So I don't really trust the platform, but other people have successfully used it, and it works for their companies. So I think it has trade-offs just like anything else.
There was another question there in the back.
Hi, nice overview. I have more business question. How do you see future of the App Store, for example? Because you mentioned on one of your slides progressive web applications, if I have right, and then something that's coming and that's very powerful. The only limitation is Safari browser actually at the moment, and the reach of the web is much higher than reach of the native applications. So a lot of features are already here. We can use it quite easy in web technology, and I cannot agree that user experience in web applications for mobile today is awful, because it's better and better, and it's quite good, especially if you are using new versions of Chrome. So how do you think this will change the App Store, and what's the future? Because we saw that almost 99% doesn't download the applications. For example, I have Facebook and something like that, but not so much applications on my phone. Thank you.
So I think the future is going to be some kind of hybrid of like web and native experience, because people don't want to download stuff, but we want the native experience. So I think the future is that type of instant apps where they might go to the website, but they might click onto some feature, and then the native experience shows up, and they get to browse photos in a native photo picker, or maybe they upload photos, or they take a photo, they upload it, and it goes to the web. So I think we need the native experience because it's just smoother and nicer on the iPhone. But I think it does need to be more distributed than stuck in the App Store. But maybe Apple still will have to review the process. It's interesting, in China, they have the WeChat app, and that app does everything and handles payments, chatting. Like, people can't live without WeChat. And the cool thing about it is it's independent from the App Store, because people use it so much. When Apple has, WeChat actually decided not to give a cut of donations to Apple of money, and Apple couldn't shut them down, because if there's no WeChat on the iPhone, nobody in China will use the iPhone. So that's another, right? The other spectrum is, can we have the one app that goes above the App Store? But I think more likely is more of a distributed feature where Apple will still approve apps and the quality, but when you go to the web, you can go, when you go from the web, you go to different apps, and also apps sharing. right? Like when I go to Foursquare, I go to Apple Maps, and I can see the restaurant I saw. I think there'll be a platform for apps to also share the content. Apple just acquired the Workflow app that kind of does that, so it'd be cool if I can go into the Facebook Messenger app and plant my own little small app inside there. So I think there'll be more interconnected and more smooth.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.